You've probably carried a quiet truth inside you, one that feels steady, calm, unquestionably yours. But every time you say it out loud, the whole room seems to shift. For you, and for many people like you, not wanting children has never been an act of rebellion. It's a knowing that has grown with you over the years, shaped by the long journey of healing your own wounds, by witnessing the fractures within your family, by recognizing that you're still learning how to hold the younger version of yourself who never felt fully protected. And yet, society reacts as if you're breaking something sacred, as if you're refusing a duty you never asked for and never agreed to bear. People assume your choice is cold or careless, but they rarely see the emotional history behind it. They don't see the late nights you spent questioning whether you were disappointing someone, the fear of repeating generational pain, or the way you quietly told yourself that healing must come before inheritance. They don't realize that for many, choosing not to have children is not about avoiding responsibility at all. It's about understanding responsibility too deeply. It's about knowing the cost of emotional pain, knowing the consequences of unstable households, and refusing to pass forward wounds that still leave marks on your own life. Science supports this more than people think. A 2022 study from Michigan State University found that adults who identify as child-free by choice are just as satisfied with their lives as parents and often demonstrate higher levels of self-awareness and autonomy traits associated with healthier emotional functioning. Choosing not to have children, then, is not a deficiency of instinct, but an expression of clarity. So when others question your decision, remember this: what unsettles them is not your choice, but what your choice represents. You are stepping outside a script they never realized they had been following. You are living a life defined by consciousness instead of expectation, healing instead of repetition. And that alone makes your path not only valid, but profoundly brave. You might think your decision not to have children makes you an exception, but in reality, it places you among a growing number of people whose inner world doesn't match the script society tries to hand them. When you say, "I don't want kids," what you're really saying is something far more honest: "I understand myself." And that level of clarity has always made others uncomfortable, not because your truth is wrong, but because it exposes how rarely people pause to question their own choices. For many, the idea of becoming a parent isn't a conscious decision, it's the default. It's what their parents expected, what their culture reinforced, what they thought adulthood automatically required. But your mind doesn't work that way. You don't accept meaning simply because it was given to you. You search for meaning that aligns with your emotional reality, your nervous system, your healing journey. That alone places you in a category of individuals who navigate life not by instinct or pressure, but by introspection. Some people look at children and feel an immediate biological pull. You look inward and feel something different, an awareness that your emotional bandwidth, your inner resources, or your personal priorities simply don't align with raising another human being. You're not avoiding life. You're acknowledging your limits with honesty, something many people never learn to do. Psychologists call this self-differentiation, the ability to define your values independently of social expectations. And this ability is strongly tied to mental health and long-term life satisfaction. But there's another layer, one most people overlook: the emotional cost of your past. Maybe you grew up in a home where affection wasn't safe, where love was inconsistent, or where survival mattered more than connection. Maybe you witnessed adults who were exhausted, resentful, or emotionally absent. Maybe you learned early that childhood isn't always gentle. When someone like you decides not to have children, it isn't cold-hearted, it's compassionate. It's you saying, "I will not repeat what hurt me." A 2015 study in the Journal of Family Psychology found that adults who experienced high childhood adversity are significantly more likely to report ambivalence or reluctance toward parenthood, because trauma creates an acute awareness of the emotional risks involved. And then there's the world itself: climate anxiety, economic instability, global uncertainty. These pressures aren't imagined. You're not overthinking. You're thinking responsibly. You're analyzing what it truly means to raise a child in a time when even adults are struggling to feel grounded. Instead of blindly continuing a lineage, you're questioning the context in which a new life would grow. That kind of long-term thinking isn't fear, it's wisdom. Of course, people will say you're selfish, but that's only because they don't understand the version of selfishness you're avoiding. Having a child for the wrong reasons: loneliness, societal validation, fear of regret. You're refusing to use another human being as a solution for your own emotional holes, and that alone makes your decision one of the most ethical ones a person can make. In the end, what you're doing is simple. You're choosing a life that fits your emotional truth. You're giving yourself space to grow, heal, and define meaning on your own terms. Not wanting children isn't a flaw. It's a reflection of your awareness, your sensitivity, your emotional intelligence. And the more you understand this choice, the more clearly you'll see that your path, even if misunderstood, is a deeply human one, shaped not by rebellion, but by reflection, clarity, and courage. You've probably noticed something about yourself before you ever said the words, "I don't want children." You had already spent months, maybe even years, thinking about it, quietly, not because you were afraid of what people might say, but because you take your life seriously. You don't make big decisions out of impulse. You make them out of clarity. And that's the part many people around you never see: the maturity, the thoughtfulness, the self-respect behind your choice. They hear your words, but they don't understand the weight of reflection behind them. You're the kind of person who looks at life and notices things others overlook. You see the exhaustion in parents who are barely holding it together. You see the unspoken tension behind polite smiles. You sense old emotional wounds still living inside families, wounds passed down silently, generation after generation. You remember moments from your own childhood that shape you. Moments when you whispered to yourself, "I will not let another child go through this." And you say that not from judgment, but from a place of deep knowing, because once you were the child who wasn't loved enough, the child who didn't receive the care, attention, or safety they needed. People might say you're overthinking, but you know you're not. This is simply how someone who has lived through emotional scarcity makes decisions with awareness, with caution, with honesty. You've spent years healing the parts of yourself that no one else protected. So of course you're careful. Of course you're intentional. A 2019 study published in Frontiers in Psychology found that individuals with higher self-awareness and stronger emotional boundary setting were more likely to make deliberate long-term life decisions, including the decision to remain child-free. In other words, your clarity isn't an accident. It's the product of emotional growth. You're also someone who needs space to breathe, to calm your nervous system, to sit with your thoughts, to rebuild yourself without interruption. You know how much effort it already takes to manage your own emotions after the childhood you had. And the idea of carrying another person's emotional world day after day, year after year, doesn't just feel heavy, it feels impossible. Not because you lack love, but because you understand how easily love can get swallowed when a person is overwhelmed or unhealed. You refuse to recreate the conditions that once hurt you. Some people find meaning in raising children. You find meaning in reclaiming your own life, in breaking patterns instead of repeating them, in creating the stability you never had, in choosing peace over pressure. You've learned that every person defines purpose differently, and no life path is more sacred than another. The difference is that your path is chosen consciously, not inherited. Sometimes people ask, but what if you regret it? But regret doesn't come from living your truth. It comes from ignoring it. And you've ignored yourself before. You know exactly how much that hurts. You've stayed in roles, relationships, or expectations that suffocated you, and you promised yourself you wouldn't do that again. So when you look inside yourself now, really look, you'll see this clearly. Your inner world isn't empty because you don't want children. It's healing. It's spacious. It's finally growing in the way it should have grown when you were young. And choosing not to have children isn't a sign of a missing part. It's a sign you're finally giving yourself the love, safety, and freedom you never received. It's not a lack of love. It's a different way of loving your life and loving the child you once were. There is a truth inside us, gentle yet unbearably heavy. A truth we rarely voice unless we're in the presence of someone who genuinely understands. You and I don't avoid parenthood because we dislike children. In fact, many of us adore them. What we truly fear is the slow erosion of self, the feeling of fading into the background of our own lives. It isn't a dramatic disappearance. It happens quietly, gradually, in the same way we watched the adults around us soften at the edges until their spark was barely recognizable. The more they devoted themselves to their children, the more they seemed to lose pieces of who they once were. We grew up watching people we loved become exhausted versions of themselves, going through each day with a numb kind of duty rather than genuine joy. Their laughter turned into something forced. Their dreams were shelved under the label "one day," and their needs were always the last in line. Even without words, we could sense their inner conflict, loving their children fiercely, yet grieving the parts of themselves that vanished along the way. As children, we absorbed those moments more deeply than anyone realized. We learned that adulthood, especially parenthood, could cost you your identity. And because no one addressed it openly, we learnt through silence. We learnt through watching our parents put themselves aside until there was almost nothing left. We learnt through homes where tension filled the air, where stress was normal, where affection sometimes felt like a luxury. We learnt through the heavy footsteps coming home late, through the hollow eyes at the dinner table, through the sighs they thought we didn't hear. Slowly, our nervous systems formed an unspoken belief: losing yourself is not only possible, it's likely. So when we grew up and someone asked, "Why don't you want kids?" we struggled to explain a truth that wasn't born from rebellion but from memory. Choosing not to have children became a way of choosing ourselves, defending the parts of us we've worked so hard to reclaim. It isn't selfishness, it's survival. It's the deep knowing that we cannot pour from an empty self, that we once witnessed what happens when someone tries. It's the promise we made silently to our younger selves: I won't let us disappear like that. Psychologists call this self-protective decision-making, a process shaped by early emotional environments. A 2018 study in the Journal of Family Psychology found that adults raised in households marked by chronic parental burnout were far more likely to avoid parenthood, not because they rejected family, but because they associated parenting with self-loss and emotional depletion. In other words, our memories became our data. Our childhood became our research. And even now, when society tells us we're avoiding responsibility or missing out on joy, a deeper truth whispers back: we're simply refusing to repeat the wounds we witnessed. We're choosing presence over pressure, authenticity over expectation. We're choosing to honor the self we once watched disappear in others. This choice isn't about rejecting life. It's about protecting the life within us. Because the lesson we learned long before we could name it still guides us today. If we don't protect ourselves, no one else will. And maybe just maybe, this time, we're finally listening. There comes a moment, often somewhere in your late 20s or 30s, when you stop rushing through life long enough to hear yourself clearly. It's quiet, not dramatic, not rebellious, just a steady truth you can no longer ignore. The life you want is different from the life others expect you to choose. And for many of us, that truth is simple. We don't want children, not because we're damaged or selfish, but because we've spent years learning how to hold our own hearts together, and we understand exactly what we can give without losing ourselves again. Sometimes this truth feels like a soft whisper that arrives at the end of a long day. You look around at your home, your quiet routines, the small pockets of peace you fought hard to create, and something deep inside exhales. You realize you don't want to trade this stability for the chaos you witnessed in other households growing up. For the first time, you give yourself permission to say, it's okay to choose differently. Other times, the truth hits like a memory, a flashback to the home you grew up in. Maybe it's remembering a parent whose exhaustion became a personality. Maybe it's the feeling of walking on eggshells. Maybe it's realizing that love was present, but joy rarely was. You remember the promise you made to your younger self. We are not going to repeat this. And suddenly, not wanting children becomes less about avoidance and more about loyalty to the child you once were. Psychology supports this clarity. A study published in the Journal of Marriage and Family found that adults who prioritize emotional well-being and self-development are more likely to choose child-free paths and report equal or greater life satisfaction than parents. It's not immaturity, it's insight. It's the understanding that staying whole sometimes requires walking a different road. Yet society rarely understands. People project their fears onto your calm. They tell you you'll regret your choice, not because they can see your future, but because they're afraid to examine their own past. They mistake your clarity for confusion, your boundaries for coldness, your peace for emptiness. And suddenly you realize their judgment was never about you. Still, the misunderstanding hurts sometimes. There are days when the silence after you say, "I don't want kids," feels heavier than it should. Days when you wonder if you're disappointing people. Days when you feel slightly out of step with the world around you. But then something inside steadies, a quiet knowing that your life is allowed to fit you, not tradition. Because choosing not to have children doesn't mean you lack love. It means you respect love enough not to offer it from depletion. It means you know your emotional limits, your bandwidth, your truth. It means you refuse to disappear into a role that would cost you your sense of self. And that gentle, quiet, steady is its own kind of courage. So if you carry this truth, breathe. You're not choosing the wrong life, you're choosing your life. And for the first time, you're living it with clarity rather than expectation. That's not avoidance, that's healing. There comes a moment when we begin asking ourselves a quiet but sincere question. If I don't build a family the traditional way, then where does my meaning come from? It's not a question born from insecurity, it's born from awareness. For years we've watched people around us anchor their purpose in their children, leaning on them to give shape to their days and direction to their lives. And for the first time, we realize we are choosing a path where meaning cannot be borrowed or inherited. It has to be created, patiently, consciously, by us. That realization can feel both freeing and terrifying, because when you're no longer following the script, you have to learn how to write your own. You have to wake up and ask yourself, what makes my life worth living if no one is depending on me? What brings me alive when no one is calling me mum or dad? And slowly you begin to notice that meaning shows up in places that society rarely points to, in the peace you've built, in the creativity you've nurtured, in the relationships that feel chosen rather than assigned. Meaning starts appearing in the softest moments, in the morning calm you never knew growing up, in the friendships where you feel seen, in the evenings when you realize you're no longer living in survival mode. These quiet victories, the ones no one claps for, begin to form the foundation of a life that feels genuinely your own. And it's here, in the slow, intentional building of emotional safety, that a different kind of purpose begins to grow. Psychology backs this up. A longitudinal study published in Psychological Science found that people who base their purpose on eudaimonic well-being, meaning rooted in authenticity, personal growth, and conscious living, report higher long-term fulfillment than those who find meaning solely through traditional milestones like marriage or parenthood. In other words, meaning isn't guaranteed by having children, it's guaranteed by living in alignment with who you are. But choosing this path means learning to tolerate the discomfort of being misunderstood. People may interpret your calm as emptiness, your freedom as avoidance, your choice as confusion. They may never understand that you have simply chosen a purpose that doesn't revolve around sacrifice or lineage. And that's okay. Their inability to see your meaning doesn't make it less real, because many of us quietly, gently, are building purpose in ways that don't fit into holiday cards or family trees. We're the ones breaking generational cycles instead of continuing them. We're the ones choosing emotional clarity over obligation. We're the first branch in our family line growing sideways toward healing instead of repetition. And yes, sometimes doubt visits. Sometimes you wonder what your 70-year-old self will think of your choices. But when you look at how far you've come, the peace you've cultivated, the boundaries you've finally learned to set, the version of yourself you're becoming, you realize something powerful. Meaning isn't found at the end of a life path. It's found in every small decision that honors who you truly are. So if you're choosing a life without children, breathe. You are not lacking purpose. You are redefining it. And in a world that teaches you to follow the script, that is one of the most meaningful things you can do. In the end, choosing not to have children isn't a rejection of life. It's a commitment to living it honestly. If this video helped you feel seen, even a little, remember you're not walking this path alone. There are many of us choosing clarity over expectation, healing over habit. If you'd like more conversations like this, you can stay connected by liking this video or subscribing. Your healing matters, and you deserve a life that fits you.